My son looked at me like I was already dead. "There's food for 2 weeks," he said, tossing a box of canned beans onto the wooden table. "And plenty of firewood. You'll be fine." Fine. We were 200 miles from home. No neighbors. No cell signal. Just snow, trees, and silence thick enough to suffocate a man. Then he picked up my phone. "I'll hold on to this," he said casually. "No reception out here anyway." He slid it into his pocket like it belonged to him. Like my voice didn't matter. Like my life didn't matter. As he stepped outside, he turned back one last time. "Oh, I changed the locks on your house." He smiled when he said it. I stood in the doorway of that freezing cabin and watched his car disappear between the pines. And then I smiled, because what my son didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that something was already waiting for him at the airport. And in a few hours, his vacation would turn into a lifetime lesson. I didn't raise my son to be afraid of winter. I raised him to survive it. When my wife died 12 years ago, Ethan was 17. Too young to lose a mother. Too old to cry in front of his friends. I worked double shifts at the auto plant to keep the house, keep food on the table, keep him in school. I thought sacrifice built character. Turns out sometimes it builds entitlement. If you're listening to this and you've ever given everything to your child thinking love would protect them from becoming cruel, tell me where you're listening from. I've learned something about love the hard way, but none of this started in that cabin. It started 21 days earlier on a Tuesday afternoon when I heard something I was never meant to hear. And that was the day my son stopped being my son. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was washing a coffee mug when I heard Ethan's voice drift in from the balcony. "She doesn't suspect anything," he said, low and confident. 2 weeks in the cabin, no signal. No one checks on him. By the time anyone notices, we'll be gone. Gone. I froze. The water kept running over my hands, but I couldn't feel it anymore. "I already talked to the property owner," he continued. "We drop him off, head straight to the airport. I changed the locks yesterday." There it was. Not anger. Not a heated argument. A plan. Cold. Organized. Calm. He laughed after that. Not the laugh I remembered from Little League games or high school graduation. This one was sharper. Detached. 75 grand, he said. Clean. My knees nearly buckled. $75,000. Every overtime shift, every Christmas bonus I never spent. 40 years of calloused hands and early mornings. And my own son was calculating it like a clearance sale. I dried my hands slowly. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he might hear it through the glass. But he didn't, because to him I was already irrelevant. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my recliner, the same one where my wife used to read before cancer hollowed her out, and I stared at the wall. There are moments in a man's life when something shifts. Not loudly. Quietly. That was the night I stopped being a father and started becoming a strategist. He thought I was weak because I was old. He forgot who taught him how to think. The next morning, I put on my gray work jacket like nothing had changed. Routine is a powerful disguise. I made Ethan breakfast, eggs, toast, black coffee, the way he liked it. I even asked him about the promotion he'd been chasing. He smiled at me across the table. That smile almost broke me. If you've ever looked at someone you love and realized they're already gone, you know that feeling. It's not rage. It's something colder. That afternoon, I drove to see the only person I trusted completely. Martin Cole. We'd been friends for 30 years. Retired prosecutor. Sharp mind. Quiet man. The kind who listens more than he talks. I told him everything. The balcony call, the cabin, the airport, the money. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he leaned back and said something I'll never forget. "Do you want revenge, or do you want justice? There's a difference. Revenge is emotional, sloppy. Justice is patient. I want him to understand what he tried to do," I said. "And I want him to face it." Martin nodded slowly. Then we moved carefully. That same day, we transferred $60,000 into a new account under a trust structure Ethan couldn't touch. We left $15,000 where it was, just enough to make him feel confident. If you're thinking that sounds ruthless, maybe it is, but survival changes a man. And here's what Ethan didn't know. While he was planning my isolation, I was building a case. And the law moves slower than anger, but it hits harder. 3 days later, Martin introduced me to someone else. A private investigator named Daniel Reyes, mid-50s. Former state trooper, the kind of man who notices everything from a twitch in your jaw to the mileage on your tires. He didn't ask why I wanted my own son followed. He just asked, "How far are you willing to let this go?" "As far as he's willing to take it," I said. Daniel began surveillance that same week. Within 48 hours, the picture started forming. Ethan wasn't just desperate. He was drowning. Credit card debt, personal loans, 2 maxed out lines of credit, nearly $30,000 he hadn't told me about. And Jessica? She was meeting someone. A man named Ryan, late 20s. Waiter at a high-end steakhouse downtown. Frequent cash exchanges, private conversations in parked cars. Betrayal has layers. I thought I was the victim. Turns out, my son was already being played. Daniel showed me photos across Martin's conference table. Ethan entering a pawn shop. Jessica handing an envelope to Ryan. Airline tickets printed 2 days apart, same destination. Maldives. Only Ethan didn't know Jessica had booked a separate ticket to meet Ryan 1 day later. If you're still listening, tell me something. Have you ever watched someone dig their own grave and wondered whether to warn them? Because that was the moment I realized something. I wasn't just defending myself. I was about to let the truth collapse on top of him. And he still had no idea. The following week, Ethan came over with paperwork. "Dad, it's just temporary power of attorney," he said casually. "So I can manage your accounts while you're resting at the cabin. Pay utilities. Handle bills." Resting. That word almost made me laugh. I adjusted my glasses and read every line slowly. He shifted in his chair, pretending patience. The document would have given him full financial control. Every cent. I looked up at him. For a split second, just a flicker, I saw something in his eyes. Not guilt, fear of being caught. "Of course," I said gently. "I trust you. If you've ever had to lie to your own child to protect yourself, you know how that feels. It tastes like metal in your mouth." I signed. He exhaled in relief. What he didn't know was simple. The real money was already untouchable. That signature? It was bait. After he left, I called Martin. "He's moving forward," I said. "Good," Martin replied calmly. "So are we." Daniel had installed discrete recording devices in Ethan's car and living room, fully legal. Under consent parameters we structured carefully. We weren't guessing anymore. We were documenting. 2 nights later, Daniel sent us a file. Audio. Crystal clear. Jessica's voice first. "To the old man who's funding our freedom," she said, laughing. Ethan clinked a glass. 2 weeks from now, we'll be on a beach." Then she added something he wasn't expecting. "Just make sure you transfer everything before we split. Ryan and I aren't waiting around." Silence. "What?" Ethan asked. And in that moment I heard something I hadn't expected. Confusion. The trap wasn't just closing on him. It was closing around all of them. And I realized something else. Justice wasn't going to be clean. It was going to hurt. 2 days before the trip, Ethan became unusually attentive. He brought groceries, fixed the loose hinge on my kitchen cabinet, even replaced a burnt-out light bulb in the hallway. Guilt makes people generous. Or maybe he was rehearsing his goodbye. "Make sure you pack warm, Dad," he reminded me. "It gets real cold up there." I almost asked him how he knew. Instead, I nodded. That night, Daniel sent one more recording. This one changed everything. Jessica's voice again, sharper this time. "Once the transfer clears, we don't need him anymore. You go your way, I go mine. Ryan's already booked." Ethan sounded blindsided. "That wasn't the deal." "You were a means to an end," she replied. "Don't pretend you weren't doing the same to your father." Silence. Then something unexpected. Ethan's voice cracked. "You said we were building something." "We are," she said coolly. "Just not with you." I paused the audio halfway through. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to pity. My son wasn't just a predator. He was prey. But here's the hard truth. Being manipulated doesn't excuse attempted murder. If someone convinces you to abandon your father in the snow, and you agree, that choice is still yours. The next morning, Ethan knocked on my door at 6 a.m. "Ready for your getaway?" he asked with that practiced smile. I picked up my suitcase. Small, light. I left behind everything else because I knew I'd either return victorious or not at all. As we drove out of the city, the buildings disappeared first. Then the cell service. Then the roads. Snow swallowed the world mile by mile. And the closer we got to that cabin, the calmer I became. Because while my son believed he was driving me toward my end, he was actually driving himself toward his. The cabin looked smaller than I imagined. Old wood. One window. A thin trail of smoke curling from a rusted chimney. Snow piled high against the steps. Jessica stayed in the car. Engine running. Didn't even pretend. Ethan carried my suitcase inside and set it beside the narrow bed. There's firewood stacked out back, he said. Canned food should last 2 weeks. Ration it. 2 weeks. That was the timeline they'd calculated. 2 weeks for exposure to do what they didn't want to do themselves. I ran my hand across the wooden table, feeling the cold grain beneath my palm. You'll come back for me? I asked. My voice trembled just enough. Performance matters. Of course, he said quickly. Too quickly. This is just for you to rest. Clear your head. He stepped outside, then paused and walked back in. He picked up my phone from the table. No signal out here anyway, he said casually, sliding it into his coat pocket. Then came the final touch. Oh, I changed the locks on your house. He smiled when he said it. Not wide, not dramatic, just satisfied, as if he'd finally solved a long-standing inconvenience. He walked out. Snow crunched under his boots. The car door slammed. Tires spun slightly before catching traction. I stood in the doorway and watched the red taillights fade into white. Silence swallowed everything. No wind, no birds, just distance. If you're still listening, imagine standing there. 68 years old, alone. No phone, no transport, no witness. That's what he believed he'd left behind. But the moment the sound of his engine disappeared, I closed the cabin door, walked to the bed, reached under the mattress, and pulled out the satellite phone Daniel had hidden there 48 hours earlier. I dialed one number. Activate it, I said calmly. On the other end, Martin replied, it's already in motion. The cold inside that cabin wasn't dramatic. It was patient. It crept in slowly, through the cracks in the window frame, through the floorboards, through the silence. I lit the wood stove and sat in the chair facing the door. 6 hours. That's how long it would take them to reach the airport. 6 hours believing they had won. The satellite phone buzzed in my hand. Daniel, they're 3 hours out, he said quietly. I'm 2 cars behind. They have no idea. Good. There was a pause. You holding up? I looked around the cabin, the single bed, the stack of canned beans, the frost forming in the corners of the window. He left me enough to survive, I said. He just didn't expect me to. Daniel exhaled softly. Airport security is briefed. Local authorities have the recordings, the financial transfers, the power of attorney document. They'll wait until he checks in. Public. That part mattered. Poof. Not because I wanted humiliation, but because secrets let people rewrite history. Exposure locks the truth in place. If you're listening right now, ask yourself something. Would you have confronted him? Would you have begged him to stop? Or would you have let him walk all the way into the consequences he built? 4 hours passed. Snow began falling harder. The phone rang again. They just entered the airport parking garage, Daniel said. I could hear faint traffic behind him. He looks relaxed. Of course he did. He thought I was freezing alone. Stay on the line, I said. There was wind, footsteps, doors opening. Then Ethan's voice. 2 more hours and we're on a beach. Jessica laughed. And then, Ethan Cole? A firm voice. Professional. Yes? You need to come with us. What? Charges include conspiracy to commit financial fraud, unlawful transfer of funds, and endangerment of a vulnerable adult. Silence. Then chaos. This is a mistake, Ethan's voice cracked. I didn't do anything. Jessica started shouting too. And then the sound of handcuffs. Metal. Finel. Daniel came back on. It's done. I closed my eyes. Justice doesn't shout. It clicks. Cold. Precise. And irreversibly. For a moment, I felt nothing. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Just stillness. The kind that comes after a storm finally breaks and you're left staring at the damage. The fire crackled beside me, steady and controlled unlike the chaos I'd just heard through that phone. Ethan shouting. Jessica blaming him. Both of them scrambling to escape consequences they had carefully designed for me. If you've ever waited for justice, you know this truth. When it finally arrives, it doesn't feel triumphant. It feels heavy. The satellite phone buzzed again. Martin this time. They're in custody. No bail for now. The recording sealed it. You're safe. Safe. That word hit harder than I expected. Because the truth is, I hadn't felt safe in 3 weeks. Not since that balcony conversation. Not since I realized my own son had calculated my death like a business transaction. Snow tapped lightly against the window. I stood up slowly and walked to the door, opening it just enough to feel the freezing air hit my face. This was the place he chose. The isolation, the silence, the certainty that no one would come looking. But someone had. I had. I went back inside and sat on the bed, staring at the wall. It was done. The plan had worked. The money was secure. The arrest was public. The charges were real. Yet somewhere under the relief, something else began to rise. Not doubt, not regret, exactly. Something more complicated. Because as much as Ethan deserved what was happening, he was still my son. And in a holding cell somewhere, he was finally understanding what it feels like to be abandoned. Daniel arrived just before dark. Snow had started falling harder, thick and relentless, erasing tire tracks like the forest itself wanted to bury what happened. He stepped into the cabin, took one look at me, and nodded. "Road's going to close soon. We should move." I grabbed my coat and followed him outside. The cold bit deeper now, sharper against my lungs. This was the air my son expected to finish the job for him. As we drove back toward the city, I watched the cabin disappear in the side mirror. It looked small, harmless, but it would always represent something else to me. The exact place where I stopped being naive. Halfway down the mountain road, the satellite phone rang again. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Grandpa?" It was Lily, my granddaughter. Her voice trembled. "The police came to school. They said Dad's in trouble. Is it true?" There are moments revenge doesn't prepare you for. This was one of them. "Yes," I said carefully. "He made a serious mistake." "Did you call the police on him?" The question hung between us like ice. Daniel kept his eyes on the road. "I protected myself," I replied. "But none of this is your fault. Do you understand me?" She started crying. "He's not a bad person." That cut deeper than anything Ethan had done. Because in her world, he was still just Dad. Not a conspirator. Not a criminal. "I know," I said quietly, "and he still loves you." When the call ended, I stared at the dark highway ahead. Justice had moved exactly as planned. But consequences don't stop where you want them to. They ripple. If you're still here with me, think about this when you defend yourself. Are you prepared for who else might get hurt along the way? The next morning I walked back into my house with a locksmith standing beside me. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The same locks my son had changed to keep me out were being replaced again, this time legally, permanently. When the door opened, everything looked untouched. My recliner. The framed photo of my late wife on the mantel. The faint smell of motor oil that never quite leaves a working man's home. But something had shifted. Houses remember things, and mine remembered betrayal. Martin met me there an hour later with documents in hand. "Preliminary hearing is set for tomorrow," he said. "They're pushing for serious charges. Attempted financial exploitation and reckless endangerment." "Reckless," I repeated quietly. There was nothing reckless about what Ethan did. It was measured, thought out. That afternoon, reporters began gathering outside. Word travels fast when a man is nearly left to freeze by his own son. Headlines don't bother with nuance. They prefer shock. Son abandons father in snowplot. I didn't step outside. I didn't give interviews. Justice doesn't need performance. But Lily called again. This time she wasn't crying. She was quiet. "They're saying Dad might go to prison," she said. "Is that true?" "Yes." "How long?" "I don't know yet." There was a long silence before she asked, "Are you going to testify against him?" That question sat heavier than the cabin cold ever did. Because tomorrow, I would have to stand in a courtroom and speak facts that would seal my son's future. And facts, once spoken under oath, don't bend for blood. Courtrooms are colder than cabins. Not in temperature and atmosphere. Fluorescent lights, hard benches, people pretending emotion doesn't exist. I sat in the front row while deputies brought Ethan in wearing county orange. He looked thinner already, sleepless, smaller. When his eyes found mine, something flickered there. Not anger, not arrogance. Fear. If you've ever seen your child afraid and known you weren't going to fix it this time, you understand that kind of pain. The prosecutor laid everything out cleanly. Audio recordings, bank transfers, the power of attorney. Evidence that I had been driven 200 miles into isolation with no communication and no way home. Had Mr. Cole not taken precautionary measures, the prosecutor said, We could be discussing a fatality. Fatality. Ethan's lawyer tried to shift blame. Financial stress. Manipulation by Jessica. Poor judgment. But poor judgment doesn't explain changing the locks on your father's house. It doesn't explain taking his phone. It doesn't explain calculating weather conditions. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly. My voice didn't shake. He left me there believing I wouldn't survive, I said. He didn't act in anger. He acted in certainty. I didn't raise my tone. I didn't cry. Facts are more powerful when delivered calmly. Ethan finally spoke. Dad, I didn't think it would go that far. I looked at him. You drove away. That was all. The judge reviewed the file for several long minutes before speaking. Given the severity of the evidence and the calculated nature of the act, bail is denied pending trial. The gavel fell, and just like that, my son's freedom ended. The days after the hearing felt unreal. Not dramatic, not chaotic, just quiet. Too quiet. My house echoed in ways it never had before. I'd walk past Ethan's old bedroom and catch myself staring at the door, remembering a 17-year-old kid promising he'd always look out for me after his mother died. Promises age badly when tested. The trial date was set for 30 days later. 30 days of headlines. 30 days of neighbors pretending not to stare. 30 days of Lily trying to process that her father wasn't coming home anytime soon. She started staying with me more often. At first it was just weekends. Then school nights. Eventually it became unspoken she needed stability, and I was what she had. One evening she asked, "Do you hate him?" Children ask questions adults avoid. "I'm angry," I told her, "but hate is heavy. I don't want to carry it forever." She nodded like she understood more than she probably should, at her age. Trauma grows children up fast. The night before the trial, I didn't sleep much. Not because I feared the outcome, the evidence was solid, but because I knew what a conviction would mean. Prison changes people. Sometimes it hardens them. Sometimes it breaks them. I didn't know which version of Ethan would come out the other side. If you're listening to this, and you've ever had to choose between protecting yourself and protecting someone you love, you know there isn't a clean answer. There's only the path you can live with afterward. The next morning, I put on a suit I hadn't worn since my wife's funeral. Some days mark the end of one life and the beginning of another. Tomorrow would decide which kind this was. The courtroom was fuller this time. Trials attract curiosity. People like watching consequences unfold, especially when family is involved. Ethan was brought in again, thinner than before. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at me. There was no defiance left in him now, just exhaustion. The prosecution didn't need drama. The recordings spoke for themselves. Jessica's voice toasting to the old man funding our freedom. Ethan confirming timelines. The financial documents showing intent. The changed locks. The removal of my phone. Every piece formed a chain. And chains, once complete, are hard to break. Jessica tried one last time to shift blame, claiming manipulation. But the audio revealed agreement, not coercion. You can hear the difference when someone is forced versus when they are willing. When it was time for closing statements, the prosecutor said something that stayed with me. This case is not about money. It is about calculated abandonment. It is about knowingly placing a vulnerable person in conditions that could have led to death. Ethan's attorney asked for leniency. First offense: financial desperation, emotional distress. The judge sat quietly for a long time before speaking. This was not impulsive. This was deliberate. The court finds the defendant guilty of financial exploitation and reckless endangerment. The sentence, 7 years. 7 years. Ethan closed his eyes when he heard it. No shouting, no outburst, just a long exhale, like a man finally understanding the cost of his decisions. As deputies led him away, he said one thing. "I'm sorry, Dad." I didn't answer. Not because I couldn't. Because some apologies arrived too late to change anything. The house felt different after the sentencing. Not quieter, heavier. 7 years isn't a lifetime, but it's long enough to reshape one. Lily moved in with me permanently 2 weeks later. The courts called it temporary guardianship. We both knew it was more than that. She needed stability. I needed purpose. The first night she stayed for good, she stood in the hallway outside Ethan's old room. "Can I use this one?" she asked softly. I nodded. We packed his old trophies into boxes and slid them into the attic. Not thrown away, just stored. Some histories aren't erased, they're archived. If you're still here listening, tell me something. Have you ever had to rebuild a life in the same place it broke? Because that's what we were doing. Same walls, different reality. Lily started therapy. I did too. People think revenge ends when the gavel falls. It doesn't. That's when reflection begins. Every session felt like reopening a wound to clean it properly. Necessary. Uncomfortable. One evening, Lily asked if she could visit her father. I didn't hesitate. Of course, I said. He's still your dad. The words surprised even me. Anger doesn't cancel blood, it just complicates it. The first prison visit was quiet. Ethan cried when he saw her. I watched from a distance. He looked smaller behind the glass, like the weight of consequence had finally settled on his shoulders. As we left, Lily squeezed my hand. He looks different. He is, I said. The truth is, so was I. Justice had been served. But forgiveness? That was going to take longer than 7 years. 6 months passed before I agreed to see Ethan alone, not with Lily in the room, not behind the buffer of her presence, just him and me separated by reinforced glass and years of unfinished history. Prison has a way of draining color from a man. He looked older than 7 months should allow. Thinner, quieter. The confidence he once carried like armor was gone. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he said, I heard you transferred the money before I signed the papers. I did. He nodded slowly. You knew? Yes. Another pause. The hum of fluorescent lights above us filled the space between words. I thought you were weak, he admitted. I thought you wouldn't fight back. That sentence didn't hurt the way I expected it to. It clarified something. You confused kindness with weakness, I replied. He swallowed hard. Jessica was already planning to leave me. I didn't see it. I thought if I just solved the money problem, everything would fix itself. Money fixes bills. It doesn't fix character. I made my own choice, he continued quietly. No one forced me. That mattered more than his apology. If you're listening right now, understand something. Growth begins when excuses end. I don't know if I can forgive you, I told him honestly, but I'm not going to let this destroy Lily. His eyes softened at her name. She still visits me, he said. I know. Another long silence. Do you hate me? He asked. I thought about it carefully. No, I said, but I don't trust you. And sometimes, that's worse. When the guard signaled time was up, Ethan pressed his palm lightly against the glass. I didn't mirror it, but I didn't walk away immediately either. Healing isn't dramatic. It's incremental, and we had 7 years to decide what that would look like. Year 2 didn't bring peace. It brought routine. And routine, I learned, is how people survive what they cannot undo. Lily started high school that fall, walking through those doors carrying a last name that had made local headlines. Kids whispered at first. Teenagers can be cruel when they smell scandal. But she held her ground. She joined cross-country, came home exhausted, muddy, and alive in a way I hadn't seen since before the trial. Pain hadn't broken her. It had sharpened her. Ethan kept writing. The letters were no longer desperate. They were reflective. He described prison work assignments, classes on financial responsibility, books about accountability. He stopped blaming Jessica, stopped blaming debt. For the first time, he wrote sentences that began with, I chose. One night, Lily asked me, do you think people can really change? I didn't answer right away. Change isn't measured in words. It's measured in consistency. I think people can, I said finally. But it costs them something. And in prison, cost is counted in years. By year 4, the anger had thinned into something quieter. Not forgiveness, not trust, just distance from the heat of it all. Lily turned 17 and started talking about colleges out of state. She wanted space. A fresh start where no one knew her story. I supported that. Sometimes healing requires geography. Ethan's letters changed again, less explanation, more discipline. He described waking at 5 a.m., working in the facility workshop, tutoring younger inmates at night. He never asked when he could come home. That mattered. The entitlement was gone. In its place was something steadier, humility. One visit, he said, I don't blame you anymore. That sentence surprised me. I blamed you at first, he admitted. It was easier than facing myself. Growth doesn't announce itself. It shows up in small corrections, in tone, in posture, in the absence of excuses. On the drive home, I realized something uncomfortable. I wasn't angry every day anymore. And when anger fades, you're left with a choice. Hold on to the past, or decide who you want to be after it. Year 6 arrived quietly. Lily graduated high school in a simple blue gown, and when her name was called, I stood longer than anyone else. Not because of pride alone, but because she had survived something that could have defined her. Instead, it refined her. She chose a university 3 states away. I need to build something that's mine, she told me. I understood. Ethan had 1 year left. His letters stopped sounding like letters and more like journals. He wrote about discipline, about shame, about how easy it had been to see me as an obstacle instead of a father. That line stayed with me, an obstacle. Somewhere along the way, I had become something in his path, not someone in his life. During one visit, he didn't talk much. He just listened. That was new. I don't expect things to go back, he said finally. I just want the chance to move forward honestly. Honesty. That word carries weight when it's earned slowly. I drove home that evening realizing something unexpected. I wasn't waiting for revenge to feel complete anymore. I was waiting to see if redemption could be. The morning Ethan was released, the sky was clear. No snow, no drama, just ordinary daylight, the kind that doesn't care about your past. I didn't tell Lily I was going. She had exams, a future. She deserved forward motion without looking back every time. Ethan stepped out, carrying a small bag, and 7 years of silence behind his eyes. Prison hadn't hardened him, it had slowed him. He walked differently, spoke carefully, like someone who understood that words, once reckless, now carried weight. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. I just want the chance to prove I learned something. That was the first time he spoke about the future without asking for comfort. We drove toward my house in quiet reflection. When we arrived, I didn't unlock the door immediately. I looked at him and said, "Trust doesn't reopen overnight." He nodded. "Then I'll wait." And that was the difference. 7 years ago, he tried to rush an ending. Now, he was willing to earn a beginning. I unlocked the door, not fully, not symbolically dramatic, just enough. Because sometimes justice closes a chapter, but wisdom decides whether another one is written.